Hello, YouTube. Apologies if my voice sounds a little bit funny. I got a bit of a sore throat, and I was more than a little bit of an idiot today, and I threw a form on my Anaros right before I realized that I really should start recording this weekly randomizer. So I can't really show off Anaros or my hilarious provoked build, but there you go. Stop the video if you really feel the need to see that. And let's go ahead and I'm not going to be able to stick with him, so I'll hit the randomize key again if he shows up a second time, but that's okay. We're going to be running with Ivara, it looks like, for this first sortie mission today. And before I forget, slap on Zineric, because, well, Ivara doesn't necessarily need the Zineric at any point other than the start of the mission, since she's going to be channeling her cloak most of the time, but it's not a bad setup. And I will say this. The fact that we rolled a bow on Ivara is pretty cool. Just real quick, I want to check to see if this is even a logical mission for the sword thing at all. No, it's a defense mission. Okay, well, that's going to be a little bit of a longer mission and somewhat difficult for me to run by myself, but actually there's a logical build I can be running on Ivara to make that easier. So I'm going to show off what I normally run here. So the first, Ivara is obviously a Warframe that has, well, she should have an even stronger place in the meta than she does, because Ivara has some of the best tools for stealth gameplay of any frame in the game. And what I normally run Ivara with is this setup here. Now you might be noticing 40% strength off the overextended, and that does mean that the build suffers in a couple of ways. First of all, the build suffers in that Artemis bow deals pretty piddly damage. That's significantly less damage than any bow you would be running as a primary weapon, even after mods. Second of all, and this is a little bit less obvious, that Ivara has this power strength scaling. Prowl only has a 2 in 5 chance that any given pickpocket actually produces any loot. Now you can pickpocket the same enemy multiple times in a row, which is a little bit time consuming, but ultimately you'll still get some successful pickpockets and you'll still get some extra energy that way. Now, why am I building Ivara this way? What was my goal that I'm going for? The answer is I am absolutely optimizing her around sleep arrow. I want to make sure that the sleep radius on the arrow is as large as possible. We got it close to 15 meters. Now, I haven't got it quite all the way up to 15 meters, but, you know, it's still pretty good. And it keeps the enemy slept for 10 seconds. And all that is simultaneously happening while Prowl is at a minimal energy cost per second. As you can see, base energy cost is 1, so we're already at a quarter of that channeling efficiency. Or that, quarter of that channeling cost. So we have cheap arrows that sleep enemies super easily, and we have very, very cheap Prowl. And those are the two goals of that build. So we're running Infiltrate to augment the Prowl to make sure that we can slip through spy barriers, and Overextended Stretch to hit that huge amount of power range. And then we've got Quick Thinking, Prime Flow, just as some generic defensive mods. Prime Flow being the important one here. That means that we can stick in the cloak for a long time. What's also helping the cloak stay up for a long time is this Fleeing Expertise and Streamline, and Prime Continuity help negate the ability, the duration downside of the Fleeing Expertise. So that's essentially the whole build that I typically run on this Ivara, and this build is extremely powerful for things like spy missions, like rescue missions. It makes Ivara one of the best Warframes at accomplishing an objective out of any Warframe in the game. You know, obviously, you're going to be in your cloak, so you're going to be somewhat slower than, say, a Loki is. But by the same token, Ivara is able to not only pass through any particular barrier that she needs to without setting off, but she's also able to use the sleep arrows to keep enemies from having any way to aggro onto her. And this build's also particularly good in that it's got a very large noise radius. As you can see, the noise radius is almost 50 meters, which will cover any particular tile in which you happen to be shooting a noise arrow. And that means that Ivara can additionally point enemy aggro in an area towards a specific location and essentially get enemies away from whatever objective she needs to be fiddling with. Now, is that the build we're going to be running here? No, I don't think so. I think what I'm going to run here for this mission, since it's defense, is this build right here that I've actually set up to be designed for protecting a specific NPC, in this case the defense target NPC that gets spotted in sorties. So what we've got here is a build that's designed entirely around duration, and we're going to be optimizing around the cloak bubble here instead. Now the cloak bubble on this build has a very, very small radius, but it's still big enough to completely cover one unit, and it lasts for 30 seconds, so we only have to recast a new bubble once every 30 seconds. Now, how we're getting there? Well, like I said, the very small radius is because of narrow-minded, because we've got to get to huge amounts of duration to make this work. So we're also going with Constitution and Prime Continuity to add tons more duration, and we've got Empowered Quiver here, so that our Cloak Arrow also prevents status effects and purges status effects off of whatever unit it's attached to, which is pretty cool. You can use this on NPCs to keep them completely safe from incoming aggro, or you can use this on allied Warframes, and that allows you to essentially cast a Loki invisibility onto an allied Warframe for a period of time, which is pretty cool. Alongside that, we're running again Prime Flow Quick Thinking, because this build does still have pretty good prowl efficiency here. In this case, we're still at very low energy per second, but in this case, it's because rather than because we have high efficiency, it's actually because we have tons and tons of duration. Either way, channeling, that's the way it works. And because this build does kind of rely on Ivara playing a little bit more aggressively and killing enemies a little bit more intentionally, we're also running Redirection as a tertiary defensive mod here, just to keep her alive a bit better. Since Ivara has more shields than health, and neither is particularly good since she has no armor, you know. Let's see, I think I mentioned everything here. Finally, the power drifts. I'm not entirely sure what I could put into the Exilus that would be better. We've already got knockdown recovery from Constitution, so just giving a little bit of extra critical damage on Empowered Quiver is cute. The other thing that I might consider going here, especially because I'm not really too worried about the crit damage, and the 15% or whatever crit damage you might get off that. Other thing I might consider going here is Pain Threshold, actually, just to improve the stagger recovery off of Quick Thinking. That could be pretty good. So I guess I'm just going to go ahead and use that for the time being. Seems reasonable. Now, what have we got to go with, Ivara? Since this isn't a spy mission, or similar, or a rescue mission being another mission that you would expect to need to go full stealth on, because it's not that, I'm not too worried about having the speed come out here. I've shown off my behind a ton of times, so this is still what the cat looks like. I don't even have to explain that at this point, I don't think. What I should have to explain here is my dread. Now, there's a few different ways that you can set up the dread, but ultimately it's still, regardless of what you're doing with the dread, it becomes one of the most powerful bows in the game. And again, the dread is sitting at roughly 200 base damage, so not altogether unlike what you'd be seeing on the Artemis bow. It's not, it's still going to be a pretty powerful weapon. What sets the dread apart are a couple things on the base stats. First of all, especially after nerfs to a couple of the high crit beam weapons like the Amprex and whatnot, I believe the Dread still did have one of the highest base crit chances of any weapon in the game, at a base of 50%. So as you can see there, so that lets this sucker sit on guaranteed yellow crits and the occasional nasty orange crit that's coming through. You'll see orange crits maybe every other time you pull back the trigger, not quite that often, maybe every third time, you know, all depending on multi-shot. Whether one of the arrows that comes out of the bow is going to be an orange crit. Now, other mods that we're running here are going to be Vital Sense and Hammer Shot, just for increased critical damage, just to abuse that high critical chance as much as possible. Serration, bonus damage, split chamber, bonus multi-shot. Vial Acceleration as a pretty standard mod on bows. What you really want on bows is to get the charge rate down to something manageable. Typically, anywhere from about 0.15 to 0.25 seconds to charge the bow is reasonable. You can make up to about 0.33 work, but above that, bows start to become a little bit unwieldy, where enemies will be moving faster than you can track them in the time that the bowstring gets pulled all the way back. So Vial Acceleration is the best way to really accomplish that. The minus 15% damage is stacking additively with the plus 165 off Serration, so it's really not doing that much to reduce the overall damage output. But if you're really worried about that, like I said, the result you get off speed trigger would be roughly the same. I like Spike Acceleration slightly better. Finally, the other reason why the Dread is extremely powerful is that we've got a huge percentage of slash damage. And as you might be aware, slash is one of, if not the most powerful damage types to be proccing a status of. And while the Dread certainly isn't designed to be a status bow at heart, it physically can be a pretty powerful status weapon when it does proc those status effects, which is not entirely unlikely. We got thermite rounds on here just to add a little bit of extra status chance. This stupid notification is blocking my screen. Let me quick get rid of that. I don't know if it's going to bork up the video for a second there. Hopefully not. Anyways, we're going with thermite rounds here just because I would prefer to be running Malignant Force and Rhyme rounds to get viral to stack with those slash effects, but because of needing this viral acceleration here to give the weapon extra fire rate to be able to draw faster, we don't necessarily have enough elemental mod slots for that, and I prefer to run the Hammer Shot over another dual stat. I feel like the Hammer Shot just is adding more to this weapon's potential since we have so high of a crit chance. Now, the base crit damage on the Dread is still only 2.1 times, so it's not massive how much bonus damage output you're getting, but it's still definitely more worth money for crit than for anything else. Also have this nice little Day of the Dead skin going here. I don't know exactly what that color palette is, but Fashion Frame is what you're here for. Vaykor Marelok, I think I may have shown this up before. I've got a ton of Vaykor Mareloks, so it's probably been rolling into things like the Marelok a little more frequently just because I have so many instances of that weapon in my inventory. My apologies for that. I get to show off Syndicate weapons a little bit more often than others just because I sell them to people. Anyways, Marelok Ribbon here, as you can see, the Marelok has a terrible ribbon disposition. It's only something like a 75% of base mod stats that you get even under perfect circumstances, and this isn't necessarily perfect circumstances, but still a pretty good ribbon. Bonus base damage is something you should never turn up your nose at, and the punch through is a nice little bit of utility. On top of that, we got more bonus damage, Barrel Fusion Lethal Torrent for more multi-shot, and then I'm going with 3 dual stat elementals here to get the status chance up to 100% on this sucker, and we're going with Primed Unit Charge in the last slot. I know I've talked about this weapon before. I'll talk about it again though, just a little bit. That the Marelok's strength is that it has a very high amount of base damage and a very high amount of status chance, so you can very easily get to 100% status and make this sucker splatter all sorts of status procs all over the place. And we're going with a huge percentage of heat damage here and a huge percentage of corrosive damage, so we proc those two effects pretty frequently, and impact to keep enemies staggered. So this does pretty well against armored targets. The only other thing I want to mention about the Marelok is that you really shouldn't be tricked by this 20% crit chance here. The critical multiplier is extremely low, and you don't get that much out of the crits on this weapon. The last thing here, the Prisma Cleavers, a weapon that I do enjoy and that I was actually fiddling with a little bit recently to optimize it a bit better. I do enjoy my dual swords a lot. Swirling Tiger is an underappreciated stance, and if you're not a fan of Swirling Tiger, then Carving Mantis also is an extremely fun weapon stance. Dual swords have the weakness of being primarily a single target weapon. They have very low range overall, and you're not going to be hitting more than one enemy at a time. But the primary strength is that they attack extremely quickly. Just about every dual sword in the game attacks very, very quickly, and the stances include lots and lots of multi-hit attacks. So not only are you able to stack up a combo counter on those enemies very quickly to get lots of blood rush and get to higher combo multipliers very fast, but you're also able to keep enemies stagger locked and to be able to keep that one enemy locked in place by hitting them with a melee over and over again. And you're also able to proc lots of statuses very quickly. As you can see here, the Cleavers is doing pretty well in that department, where it's sitting at a 50% status chance and lots of slash. And between all of these factors, it does make dual swords a very compelling single target weapon. Now, obviously, they're not going to be as strong as something like a heavy blade or polearm, where you can cleave through wide swaths, whatever, wide groups of enemies. But they're still a lot of fun to use, and the damage that they put out really should not be underestimated. So the dual cleavers, the thing that the dual cleavers has going for it is Justice Blades. It has an augment from Steel Meridian that gives it plus 100% bonus melee damage, and of course the Steel Meridian Justice proc, which stacks with Prime Pressure Point to cause this weapon's base damage output to be pretty darn high, which also is going to affect the damage of its slash procs pretty disproportionately. We also got here a Jagged Edge, which is the increase in the slash percentage to make sure just about every stats properly apply is slash. Again, I would be going with something like Buzzkill if I was to form up this weapon one more time. It needs a polarity, but I'm not gonna worry about that too much because ultimately dual cleavers aren't exactly my favorite. Dual sword, they're just one of my favorites. And as you can see here, we also got some bonus crit damage to go with the Blood Rush, so we got tons of crit chance, and the critical multiplier on the cleavers is 3 times, which is massive. And as you can see here, I am again stacking heat alongside slash whenever I don't have space to go with viral alongside it instead. Finally, Prime Fury, Prime Pressure Point. Arguably, things like dual swords and dual daggers and other very fast attacking weapons, maybe sparring weapons, arguably those are some of the best weapons in the game to use Berserker. I find that the dual cleavers in particular, though, just has a pretty slow base attack speed. Even though the animations are pretty fast, the base speed on the weapon is pretty bad, so I do like the Prime Fury to get a combo started a bit faster. We're also short life strike, but hopefully that doesn't matter since Ivara shouldn't be taking too many hits to health, and she's got the quick thing to rely on. I also didn't mention, if you're looking to build around Artemis Bow, this is how I would set it up. I tend not to use Concentrated Arrow. I prefer to avoid this ribbon, this augment, just because it does very heavily rely on your ability to hit headshots, which can be difficult depending on how fast the enemies are moving, how high your ping is if you're in a public match, and whether the enemies even have simple headshot hitboxes, since it can be hard to use on things like Infested. The base shotgun-like fan of arrows, I find, is just so much more consistent than Concentrated is. And it also gives you a lot more control over who and what you're shooting at a given time. That's roughly how I set it up. Much higher power strength, as you can see there, and more of an emphasis on efficiency, just because the Artemis Bow, the energy per shot depends only on your power efficiency and not on any kind of channeling mathematics. In case you weren't aware, by the way, this is a great example of how two wildly different sets of stats can give you max out channeling efficiency. What you should always think of when it comes to channeling is that you should look at the raw ability cost based on your efficiency, and you're going to take that and you're going to divide it by your power duration. So, for example, on this build, your ability costs are only 25% because we've got max ability efficiency, and actually channeling abilities do respect over maxing ability efficiency, so it'll respect this being 85% instead of 75% more efficiency. But anyways, so they would assume that will be 15% cost as opposed to 25. Anyways, what we've got going here is 75%. So we've got 25% ability cost, and divided by 105 duration is like 23% channeling costs. So that's why we're down to the base 1/4. Whereas over here, our energy costs are 70%, since we only have Streamline for efficiency, but we're dividing that by 2.82. So 70% divided by 2.8 is approximately 1/4. Very slightly less than that because it's 2.82. But 7 into 28 is 4, so 28 into 7 is approximately 1/4. What 1/4, 1/4? I can't talk. Like I said, my throat hurts. Point being, that's how you do that sort of math, in case you're curious about that sort of thing. Also, Artemis Bow is, of this build, it's usable since we got 100% power strength. So I might be pulling it out. Very, very generic build here, as you can see. We don't have the high slash damage of the Dread to work on, so that's why we're going with Corrosive here instead of a physical damage mod of any kind. But the rest of this build is very similar to the Dread, which I find to be pretty amusing, actually, that we rolled that setup like that. Anyways, let's go ahead and give this defense mission a shot. I might cut the footage a bit before the end of this mission, just because, well, I've been talking about this sort of thing for quite a while, and defense missions tend to be some of the longest possible sortie missions, so we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Oh, it's this map. How fun.
Defend the cargo until reinforcements arrive.
So, and another thing that's I'm wanting to get going here. I'm gonna go ahead and shoot some. I'm gonna go ahead and shoot some zip lines here because of that empowered quiver, just to make sure that I have the ability to work with those. But the other thing I want to get going here is I have another couple of ideas for some spoof videos and sketches and whatnot that I want to try out. So ultimately, since this is a defense mission, endless, I want to have some options here for some zip lines because I'm not going to really want to be doing that in combat. So we'll go ahead and swap back to the cloak arrow, and I think we're ready to go. Let's go talk with our target here. Hey target, there's my Marelok. I'm sure that I don't need to be showing off how that works. Here's the basic idea of the build, is that, and you see that it's even kind of questionable whether this is large enough to fully cover our friend there, but I'm going to go ahead and miss a bajillion arrow shots here and keep him safe as best as I can. I really actually need to waypoint him so I can see where he's going. Because there we go. It can be somewhat hard to keep track of if you're not paying attention. Let's go ahead and pull up the Artemis bow too, why not? Like I said, it's reasonable. It's a reasonable thing to be running this and this particular build. I'm not really too incredibly worried about using the Dread in this particular mission, because, I mean, the Dread is an excellent weapon, as you can see there. Oh god, Dapper is what's running out, isn't he? Yeah. I keep on losing that timer in the lower right whenever I go into my operator's line, but I can just watch it, I guess. Or I can miss the arrow. That's okay. As you can see, like, the Dread deals a very reasonable amount of damage. It's 20 to 30k on a crit headshot, which they're all crit headshots. If it goes into orange crit, you're talking more like 50k damage, and you can apply slash. It is very there. That was 100k almost on that headshot. 40k. As you can see, the damage dealt by the Dread is very good, and I'm not super worried about that by any means. I missed that for that time. There, I got him. Okay, I'm not super worried about that by any means. It's more that I really am more interested in going after some weapons that can have some area effects control. That's the weapon. As you can see, that's the Cleavers too. Excellent attack animations, able to take enemies and area effects and keep crowd controls. The stance for Swirling Tiger, I do particularly like as well. As you can see, there's a couple of fun little combos that you can run there where you're firing off huge multiple hit animations. The Cleavers are pretty fun. I'm not going to worry too much about getting a combo multiplier up on those though. Like I said, what I'm trying to lead up to here is I'm showing off the weapons, and then I want to really just nice orange crit. Headshots, because headshots double your critical damage, headshots are very crucial on the Dread. And like I said, the Infested are not necessarily the easiest units to get headshots on. Typically they have something resembling a head hitbox. I missed that one. That one hit him. There's something resembling a head hitbox near the top, but on some units it can be kind of hard to tell, charges especially. Haha. Plenty of slash procs being put out by this melee weapon, as you can see, too. Like, I do think that the Cleavers are an underappreciated weapon in terms of how powerful they actually are. Like, that damage is not to be sniffed at. It's not necessarily the best, though. But they're very, very fun. One of those had to have hit him, right? Okay. Anyways, 7 waves left. I'm just going to pull out the Artemis bow and use the rest of the mission on it. And like I said, this is just Artemis bow, 100% power strength. I've been considering even turning the whole extended build that I run into a build that's just sitting on 100% power strength, but ultimately I find that the cloak arrow is so much more effective with the cloak arrow is just so much more effective with orcs in it on it than without. That I find that I am more than willing to forego this tool, having the RMS bow available, in exchange for having a massive cloak arrow that CCs huge rooms full of enemies. That's just so good as a resource in things like spy missions. Because Ivara is basically the only true stealth frame that has both invisibility and a hard sleep effect that you can use to set enemies up for finishers even after they've been alerted. Makes her incredibly good at synergizing with weapons like the Rakta Dagger. Also worth noting, in case you weren't aware, when you have Artemis Bow drawn, I think I may actually have to go with Cunning Drift in the Exilus. That's looking like it's just a little too small to cover all of them. But anyways, in case you weren't aware, though, I'm not having to draw to fire these off because I have Artemis Bow out. And when you actually have Artemis Bow drawn, Alt Fire will fire a tactical arrow. Which is pretty cool. Not everyone's aware of that feature, but it is what it is. And I'm going to go ahead and hop up onto the tactical wire here to get a little more crit damage since I have that augment equipped. It's not really anything that's going to make or break the build, but it's not. It's definitely not a bad thing. Wait, that's not him. Well, surely one of those will keep him. Surely one of those hit him and will keep him cloaked at least. That small size is just, yeah, one of them hit him. That tiny size is just a little bit awkward, but you know what? That's okay. I'd rather have a tiny arrow. I'd rather have a tiny arrow that still keeps him safe, and I don't have to recast so frequently, than a big arrow that ultimately doesn't do a good job of keeping him safe because I have to spam it so much that I can't ever take a break off to kill enemies. Since the base duration on the cloak arrow is only about 10 seconds, you know, this is only reach 10 to 12 seconds, I think. This is only reaching 30 because of the massive duration on this build. Anyways, as you can see here, we are definitely not struggling to complete this mission. The long duration cloak arrow is an excellent tool that and while I don't think that this build is necessarily this is definitely not the best of our builds. It's pretty niche, but when it comes to protecting specific NPCs, you know, things like defection and whatnot, or like the NPC, and I'm not going to be able to kill that ancient. Like the NPC in a sortie defense, I really do feel like this is a really amazingly nice niche build. And him cloaked up again. I think I hit it with that, didn't I? Anyways, let's pull up the Artemis Bow again. And I was leading up to this as a prelude to go ahead and cut in the video, but I guess I'll finish off this wave real quick. Man, that healer's not taking any damage even with the orange crits we got. I'm sure he's still cloaked. It's partially because due to the splatters hitting other enemy units and healing that ancient healer. More than anything, it's due to the ancient disruptors doing the ability resistance aura. I'm powering through that because, well, exalted weapons are great at powering through disruptors, but you know. Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and cut the clip here. I'll finish off the mission in the remaining 4 waves, but it's not going to be all that particularly difficult. Even if the operative does go down, I'm sure I can still just go invisible and revive him. So, with that said, hope you all enjoyed this. This has been the Randomizer Monday, and I've got a couple new bits of content I should be coming out with either today or later this week. So, with that said, herp to derp out.